"Run." That was all he said. One word, barely a whisper, but it came from a man hanging upside down from an oak tree, blood painting his face red, his arms limp like broken wings, and the one who heard it, the one standing just 3 feet away, breath caught hard in her chest, was an 8-year-old girl, Mara Whitlock. She didn't run. She never ran. And what she did next changed both their lives forever. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The dog had a torn ear and a limp, and Mara had been chasing it for nearly 20 minutes by the time she lost it somewhere between the creek bed and the old logging path that nobody used anymore. She wasn't supposed to be this far into the woods. She knew that. She'd known it the moment she crossed the second fence line. The one with the rusted wire and the faded "no" trespassing sign that had been hanging sideways since before she was born. But Mara Whitlock had never been the kind of girl who let a boundary stop her when something needed her attention. And that dog, that poor limping one-eared dog, had looked at her with eyes that said please before it bolted. So she followed. The trees in this part of Harlan grew close together, their roots buckling up through the dirt like old knuckles. The light came down in pieces, breaking apart before it reached the ground. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, the kind that sat on your shoulders and made you walk slower without knowing why. Mara slowed down. She wasn't afraid. Fear wasn't something that came easy to her, not since her grandfather, Henry Whitlock, had spent the last 3 years of his life turning her into something she didn't yet have a name for. She slowed down because something in the air had shifted, and Henry had taught her to listen to shifts. When the woods go quiet, he used to say, pressing one thick finger to his temple, that means something already moved through. Pay attention, Mara girl. The forest always tells you what it knows. She paid attention now, and then she heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The way the normal rhythm of the woods had dropped out like a note missing from a song. She stopped walking, stood perfectly still, and listened. A drip, slow and even, liquid hitting dry leaves. She moved toward it. She almost didn't see him at first. The human brain, especially a child's brain, tries to make sense of what it sees by fitting it into something familiar, and there was nothing familiar about what was hanging from the thick lower branch of the old oak at the edge of the hollow. It took her 3 full seconds to understand what she was looking at. A man upside down, his boots tied together with rope. That rope looped over the branch above him, pulled tight with a kind of knot meant to hold something heavy for a long time. His arms hung toward the earth. His leather vest, black, covered in patches, she couldn't read from where she stood, had fallen up around his shoulders, exposing a torso that was bruised in colors she'd only ever seen on a sky before a bad storm. His face was swollen, his eyes were closed, and the dripping sound was coming from the cut above his left temple, blood running down his forehead, collecting at the crown of his head and falling one slow drop at a time to the leaves below. Mara stood frozen, not from fear, from calculation. She was 8 years old, and she was standing there calculating, because that was what Henry had made her into, a girl who calculated before she moved. How long has he been there? Is he alive? Is whoever did this still close? Those were the first 3 questions that formed in her mind, clean and clear, like her granddad had always told her they would. She took one step forward, and then the man's eyes snapped open. They were pale blue, those eyes, pale and bloodshot and burning with something she recognized immediately, because she'd seen it in the eyes of trapped animals. Pure animal desperation. His cracked lips moved. She leaned in just barely, just enough to hear. Run. The word came out like gravel wrapped in cotton, broken, weak, but behind it was something urgent, something that said, I mean it. I mean it right now. Go. Mara did not run. She took another step forward. The man's eyes went wide, wider than she thought a person could open their eyes, and something moved across his face that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite confusion. It was disbelief, the disbelief of a grown man, a hard man, hanging upside down with blood in his eyes, watching a small girl in a green jacket walk toward him head of away. "Kid," he rasped. "Kid, you need to leave right now. Are you alone?" Mara asked. He blinked, swallowed hard, which looked painful. "What?" I said. "Are you alone? Is whoever did this still here?" Another blink. His jaw worked like he was trying to find the gears for speech, and they'd rusted shut. "No, they left. But they're coming back, kid. You don't understand. How long ago did they leave?" He stared at her. A long strange stare that she didn't have time for. "How long ago?" She repeated, firmer. "Maybe an hour. Hour and a half." His voice was gaining a little ground, just a little, like a car engine that had been sitting in cold weather. "Maybe longer. I don't know." I blacked out. Mara nodded once. Her eyes moved to the rope. The knot at his ankles was a double overhand with a slipped half hitch. She could see that even from here. Tight, deliberate, made by someone who knew what they were doing. But her grandfather had known what he was doing too. "I'm going to get you down," she said. The man let out a sound that was almost a laugh, except it came out broken, more like a cough of disbelief. "Kid, that rope is holding 210 pounds. You can't. I'm not going to pull you," Mara said, moving closer, her eyes already mapping the branch, the angle, the slack in the line. "I'm going to loosen the knot and lower you slowly. Do you have any injuries to your spine?" Silence. She looked at him. He was staring at her like she'd just spoken in a language he'd never heard before, which in a way she had. "Do you," she said slowly, "have any pain in your back or neck that feels different from the other pain?" No, my back is fine. My ribs are the problem. I think a couple are cracked. I'll try to keep you from dropping, but you need to be ready to catch yourself with your arms when the rope releases. Can you do that?" He looked at his hands, dangling there, fingers swollen, knuckles split. He flexed them slowly, winced. "Yeah," he said, and his voice had gone quieter. "Yeah, I can do that." Mara climbed. She'd been climbing trees since she could walk. Henry had made sure of that. Not playful climbing, not kid climbing, real climbing, purposeful, weight balanced, hands and feet working together like a system. She went up the trunk, found her first foothold in a groove of bark, pushed up, reached the branch in 12 seconds flat. The man watched her from below, his pale eyes tracking every move. She scooted out along the branch, feeling it flex slightly under her weight, and reached the point where the rope was looped and knotted. Her fingers found the knot. Double overhand slipped half hitch. "Okay. Work the half hitch first. Don't push the bite through." Henry's voice in her head, calm and patient the way it always was. Her fingers worked. "Hey," the man called up. His voice was strange now. "Hey, what's your name?" "Mara. He seemed to hold the word in his mouth for a moment. "I'm Dale Mercer." "How old are you?" "8. Another one of those silences that felt like they had weight. "8 years old," he said, half to himself. Okay. And then quieter. "Where'd you learn knots?" "My grandfather. He must be something." He was. She felt the half-hitch give as she said it. The rope shifted. The branch above her shuddered with a sudden redistribution of weight, and she heard Dale grunt hard from below. "You still with me?" She called down. "Still here." His voice was strained but steady. "Keep going." She worked the main knot. Her fingers ached. The rope was thick, and it had been pulled hard. The fibers compacted tight under his weight, and she had to use both hands and brace her knee against the branch to get the leverage she needed. "Mara." Dale's voice floated up, lower now. "Careful. Those men, the ones who did this, they're not going to be happy if they come back and find me gone. They're going to look. You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand. They're dangerous people." "So am I," she said without looking down. Her fingers found the last turn of the knot and worked it over. She heard his breath catch below her, a sharp sound. "Brace yourself," she said. "And hands out. Here it comes." The knot released. For one terrible second, the rope sang through the branch to faster than she wanted, and she grabbed it with both hands and held, her whole body wrenching sideways with the force of his weight. Her knees locked around the branch. Everything pulled taut. She heard Dale hit the ground. Not a fall. A landing, controlled. His forearms taking the weight first the way she'd hoped. He cried out once, a short, sharp sound, and then silence. Dale, she called. I single quote some ... yeah. A long, shaking exhale. I'm down. I'm okay. She let the rope go and climbed back down in half the time it had taken her to go up. By the time her feet hit the ground, Dale had already rolled himself from his stomach to his side, and he was lying there in the leaves, staring up through the branches at the grey sky above them, chest heaving, working through the pain with the disciplined breathing of a man who'd been through pain before. She knelt beside him, up close. He was bigger than she'd understood from a distance, not just tall built in the way of a man who'd spent his life doing physical things, his arms heavy with muscle even slack like this, his hands the size of her grandfather's, but with more scars. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe 50-some, with grey stubble and deep lines around his eyes. The Hell's Angels patches on his vest were clear now. A skull with wings, California rocker on the bottom. He turned his head slowly and looked at her. She looked back. You didn't run, he said. No, I told you to run. I know. He stared at her for a long moment, something moving behind those bloodshot, pale eyes. Most grown men would have run, he said. Mara was already gently pressing her fingers along his ribs on the left side, watching his face for the exact location of pain. He flinched sharply when she reached the 4th and 5th ribs below his armpit. 2 ribs, she said. Maybe cracked, not broken all the way through. Your breathing sounds okay, so your lung is probably fine. He watched her work. You're 8? Yes, you're 8 years old, and Yordi stopped, pressed his lips together. Okay. What do we do? And that was the moment. That was the moment that mattered. And Mara recognized it, even if she couldn't have put it into words, that a man like Dale Mercer, a man who wore his identity, Mama, a man who'd spent 30-some years being the one people looked to when things went bad, that man had just said, what do we do? To an 8-year-old girl he'd known for 4 minutes. That was not a small thing. That was the kind of thing that only happened when a person was stripped all the way down to what they actually were underneath everything else. And what Dale Mercer was underneath everything was someone who understood when another person knew what they were doing. Can you walk? She asked. Not fast and not far. Not yet. We need to move away from here. Not to the road. They'll look there. There's a hollow about 100 yards that direction. She pointed east. A rock overhang big enough to get you out of sight. Can you get there? He worked himself up to sitting, and the effort it cost him showed in every line of his face. But he did it. Yeah, he said through his teeth. Yeah, I can get there. I'll take your arm, Mara said again, not asking. He looked at her for one more beat of silence, and then something in his face just settled, like a decision being made at a level below thought. He let her take his arm. They moved. He was heavy against her shoulder, far heavier than she could really carry. But Mara wasn't trying to carry him. She was just providing a point of stability, and Henry had taught her the geometry of support, how a small anchor could help a large ship hold its line. She matched her pace to his. She let him set the rhythm. She didn't speak because Henry had taught her that too. Sometimes the kindest thing you can give a person in pain is silence. Dale breathed through his nose, counted his steps without counting out loud. Sweat broke through the dried blood on his forehead. They made it to the hollow. It was a good hiding place, the kind that didn't look like a hiding place at all, just a natural depression in the ground where the root system of a fallen tree had torn up a section of earth and left a gap underneath the rock shelf above. She'd found it 2 summers ago while following a fox. She helped Dale lower himself into the space, watched him settle with his back against the cool stone, and then she stood back and looked at him. He was bad, not dying bad, she didn't think, but bad enough. His color was wrong, that greyish pale that happened when a body had been through serious stress and was still burning resources just to keep the lights on. His hands were still trembling slightly, not from cold, from shock. I need to go back, she said. Dale's head came up fast. No. I need to cover the signs. The blood on the leaves, the marks where you landed. They'll see it. They'll know exactly where to look. Mara. His voice had gone hard again. That man-in-charge voice people used when they thought hardness would work. You don't know what these men are. I know what they did to you. That's nothing compared to what they'll do to a little girl. She said it evenly, without heat, without any desire to make a point of it. Just fact. I'll be careful. His jaw tightened. She could see him working through it, weighing everything. And she could see the exact moment he came to the conclusion that he didn't have a better option. Because the truth was he didn't. He couldn't go back there himself. He couldn't stop her from going. And she was right about the signs. How long? He said finally. 10 minutes. He held up one split-knuckled hand. You got exactly 10 minutes. And then I'm coming after you. She almost pointed out that he couldn't come after anyone in his current state. She decided that wasn't the most useful thing to say 10 minutes. She agreed. She went back. The clearing where the oak tree stood felt different now that Dale wasn't hanging from it. Emptier, but also heavier somehow, like the air still remembered what it had seen. The rope still hung from the branch, its end frayed and loose where she'd worked the knot free. Blood on the leaves in a rough circle below where his head had been. She worked fast, systematic, the way Henry had taught her to do any task that mattered with full attention. No rushing, no skipping. She scattered the blooded leaves, mixed them into the surrounding ground cover, pushed fresh earth over the darkest spots. She pulled the rope down from the branch. It took tries looping it, pulling hard, finally getting enough weight on it to drag the end free. She coiled it and carried it 20 yards into the brush, shoved it under a fallen log. Then she stood back and looked at the space with fresh eyes. The way she'd been taught to look like a stranger coming in from the outside who didn't know what had happened here. She walked the perimeter, adjusted to things, looked again. Good enough, she decided. Good enough. She was turning to go when she heard it. Far off still, but unmistakable. Motorcycles, not one, multiple. The sound bouncing off the trees in that way it did out here. Impossible to tell direction from. Impossible to tell distance. Only possible to tell closer and closer and closer. Mara's heart rate went up by exactly 2 notches. She turned around and looked at the clearing she was standing in with completely different eyes. The motorcycles were getting louder. Mara didn't move, not yet. Moving too fast was how people made mistakes. And mistakes right now were something she could not afford. She stood in the middle of the clearing and she listened. Really listened. The way Henry had shown her, not just hearing the sound, but reading it. Pulling information out of it, the way you'd pull thread from a spool. 3 engines, maybe 4, spread out, not riding together tight, which meant they weren't on a road. They were cutting through the trees on the service trails that ran along the north edge of the property, which meant they'd come at the clearing from the north end. She was on the south end. She had maybe 2 minutes. She stopped thinking and started moving. She didn't run back toward the hollow, not directly. Running in a straight line left a trail. A child could follow broken branches, disturbed ground, a path pointing like a finger at exactly where she was going. Instead, she moved at an angle, cutting east, planting her feet on roots and stones where she could, avoiding the soft mud near the creek edge, making herself as close to invisible as a person her size could make themselves in a forest that still had most of its leaves on the ground. 60 yards out, she stopped behind a thick oak and listened again. The engines cut off almost simultaneously. 1, 2, 3 bikes. Silence rushed in to fill the space they'd left. And then she heard voices. Men's voices, rough and carrying and utterly unconcerned about who might hear them. The voices of people who were used to being the scariest thing around. He ain't here. That was the first voice, flat, annoyed, with a southern drag on the vowels that turned ain't into 2 syllables. Of course he ain't here. Genius. That's the point. A second voice, harder, closer to the clearing than the first. Question is where he crawled off to. Rope's gone. A third voice. And this one sent a cold thread down Mara's spine. Because this one was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't calm. The kind of quiet that's controlled, deliberate. The voice of someone who never needs to speak loudly, because everyone around them already knows to listen. A pause, footsteps, the sound of a man crouching, then standing. Somebody helped him. The quiet voice again. Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean helped him? I mean the knot was worked loose, not cut. You don't work a knot like that yourself. Not hanging upside down with your hands half dead from the blood leaving them. Somebody else was here. The quiet voice moved, and Mara tracked it by sound, moving south now toward where she'd been standing. Her pulse was steady, but present, a firm beat behind her sternum. And recently, how recently? Leaves are still settling. Mara pressed her back flat against the oak and breathed through her nose. Could be one of his boys, Southern voice offered. His boys don't know about this spot. Nobody does. Quiet voice had stopped moving. He was maybe 40 yards from where Mara stood. We're looking for whoever it was. Spread out, and don't break anything. This was the moment. Mara knew it with the clean certainty of someone who'd been taught to recognize decision points. This was the moment where one choice meant safety, and the other choice meant something else entirely. She could stay against the oak and hope they didn't come this direction. She could run and risk being heard. Or she could do the third thing, the thing Henry had always said was the hardest and most important thing. The thing that separated people who survived from people who didn't. She could think instead of react. She thought they were spreading out from the north end of the clearing. 3 men moving south and east. The hollow where Dale was hidden was east-southeast of her current position. If they spread wide enough, someone was going to walk directly through it. She needed to redirect them. She needed to do it without being seen. And she needed to do it in the next 90 seconds. Mara's eyes moved to the creek bed 20 yards to her left. The water was shallow this time of year. Barely a trickle. But the rocks were loose and the near bank was soft. She picked up a stone from the ground near her feet. Heavy, fist-sized, and she threw it. She threw it hard, the way Henry had taught her to throw, not with her arm, but with her whole body rotating, and she threw it high so it would arc and land far, and it came. Down in the shallow creek, 60 yards to the northwest, with a sharp crack of stone and a splash of water that cut through the forest. Silence like a gunshot. She was already moving before the echo finished. She heard the men react, a shout, a burst of movement, all 3 of them pivoting north and west toward the sound. She didn't look back. She moved southeast, fast and low, her feet finding the firmest ground by instinct, her arms out for balance over the roots. She made it back to the hollow in under a minute. Dale heard her coming. She could tell, because he'd pulled himself higher against the stone, his body braced, hands ready for a threat. When he saw it was her, something released in him. It was almost physical. Watching the readiness leave his body and turn into something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite exhaustion, somewhere right between the two. They're here, she said. And she was barely breathing hard, I heard. His eyes went to the space behind her. How many? 3. I pushed them north with a diversion. But it won't hold. We have maybe 5 minutes before they work out. It was a trick. 5 minutes. He said it like he was inventorying what they had and coming up short. Mara, I can walk, but I can't run. Not for any distance. I know. She was already looking around the hollow, taking stock. You're not going to run. You're going to stay here. Like hell. They're looking for one person, she said. A man, an adult. They're not looking for a little girl. And they're not going to look here, because from the outside, this hollow looks exactly like what it is, a fallen tree and a rock shelf. There's no reason to search it, unless someone knows to look. Dale stared at her. And nobody knows to look, she finished. He was quiet for a beat. And where are you going to be? Making sure they keep not knowing. Mara. His voice went hard again, that edge coming back into it, and she could hear the frustration underneath it. The frustration of a man who knew she was right and hated knowing it. These aren't. You don't understand the kind of men these are. I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of bad people. People I know what the real ones look like. And these are the real ones. The one they call Bishop. The quiet one. Dale stopped. What? There's a quiet one. Is that Bishop? The way his face shifted told her everything before he spoke. Yeah. His voice had dropped. Yeah, that's Bishop. You heard him. He's the one who figured out someone helped you. He's smart. He's more than smart. Dale's jaw worked. He's the kind of smart that doesn't stop, that keeps going. And after you think he's done, he doesn't give up. Mara, you understand. Even if he loses the trail today, he keeps pulling on it. He kept pulling on me for 8 months before he figured out where I'd be. The weight of that settled into the hollow with them. 8 months. Mara filed it away. Then I need to make sure there's nothing for him to pull on. How are you going to do that? She picked up a piece of loose bark from the ground, turned it over in her hands. I'm going to give him something else to look at. She left before he could argue again. The woods were tense in the way they got when people were moving through them. A different kind of quiet, full of micro sounds that didn't belong the snap of a careless step, the brush of a jacket against bark, the occasional low voice carrying further than its owner realized. Mara moved through it like she belonged to it, because in every way that mattered, she did. These woods had been her territory since she was 5 years old, and Henry Whitlock had first walked her into them and said, "Pay attention to everything and fear nothing." She didn't fear nothing. That was never really what he meant. What he meant was fear is a tool, not a boss. Use it. She was using it now. She could hear a southern voice somewhere to her left moving carelessly, his footsteps too heavy and too fast. Someone who was annoyed and going through the motions. She could hear a hard voice further out, mostly quiet, working methodically, and she could hear Bishop not at all, which meant he was either stationary or he moved the way she moved, and that possibility sat in her chest like a cold stone. She needed to deal with southern voice first, because he was closest and his carelessness made him predictable. She worked her way along his flank, staying parallel, letting him set the pace until she found the right piece of ground, a slight depression between two roots where the leaves had built up thick and wet, the kind of ground that looked firm but wasn't. She marked it in her mind and moved ahead of him, angling to cut across his path, further up. Then she found a game trail, a deer path barely visible, running roughly north, and she scuffed it up just slightly, put the heel of her boot into the soft edge of it twice, made it look like someone had passed through in a hurry, heading north. She found a low branch and bent it at an angle that didn't break but stayed bent, the kind of thing a shoulder would do passing too fast in dim light. She heard southern voice stop. She heard him crouch, the sound of his jacket pulling tight, his breath changing as he bent down. "Hey," his voice lifted. "Hey, got something over here." She was already gone. She moved west, circling behind where she'd last heard hard voice, and she was 10 yards into the circle when she stopped dead. Every instinct she had, every quiet lesson Henry had ever embedded into the back of her brain, fired at once. Someone was right in front of her, not moving, just standing, waiting. Bishop. He was maybe 15 feet away, half turned, looking north toward where southern voice had called out, close enough that she could see the back of his head, the patches, the silver in his dark hair where it showed beneath the black hat. He was still, the absolute stillness of a man who'd learned patience the hard way, and he was listening. Mara stopped breathing. She was behind him, slightly to his right, and the wind, what little of it moved through these trees, was coming from the west, which put her downwind of him. That was luck, and Henry had always said that preparation was how you made yourself lucky. She watched him. He turned his head slightly, not toward her, toward the north, tracking southern voice by sound. He had a way of holding himself that she recognized, not from people she'd known, but from animals she'd observed, the held-in-place quality of a predator that has picked its ground and is waiting for the prey to come to it. If he turned another 15 degrees to his right, he'd see her. She needed him to turn left instead. She moved her hand to the ground beside her, searching by feel without looking down, and found a small stone, smooth, the size of a marble. She measured the angle in her head, longer throw this time, higher arc, landing well to the north and east of Bishop's current position. pulling his attention toward where his man was calling from and away from the dark space where she was standing. She threw it. The stone sailed over Bishop's head, invisible in the dimness, and landed 30 yards northeast in a shower of disturbed leaves that sounded briefly exactly like a running footstep. Bishop moved. He went north fast and quiet in a way that made her breath catch, because that was how he moved, quick and smooth and utterly without wasted motion. The way very dangerous people moved when they stopped pretending not to be. She watched him go and held herself completely still until she couldn't hear him anymore. Then she let the breath out. Then she sat down on the ground right there just for 5 seconds and let herself feel how fast her heart was beating. Henry had always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear. He'd said it so many times, it had become something she said to herself without even thinking about it. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the necessary thing while the fear was still there, and then when it was over, sitting down for 5 seconds and letting yourself feel it, because feeling it meant you were still human and still honest about what was real. She counted to 5. She felt it. Then she stood up and went back to work. For the next 20 minutes, she ran them in circles. That was the only honest way to describe it. She stayed ahead of them, always ahead, using their own noise to track them while staying silent herself, redirecting each one in turn with thrown stones and bent branches and the occasional deliberate impression in soft ground. She led Southern Voice so far north, he ended up near the old fence line and had to turn back. She sent Hard Voice east into a section of tangled undergrowth that slowed him to a crawl. And she watched Bishop with the careful, terrified respect of someone who understood they were dealing with something genuinely dangerous, redirecting him only when she absolutely had to, never getting close, never giving him anything real to find. But Bishop was the problem. Bishop kept coming back to the clearing. She watched him circle it twice, crouching, standing, moving, crouching again. And she could see him thinking, the process of it visible in how his body moved, how he kept returning to the same spots, how he wasn't following any trail she'd laid, but was instead mapping the negative space, looking at what wasn't there instead of what was. He was looking for what was missing. And then he stopped dead still in the center of the clearing. He looked at the branch where the rope had hung. He looked at the ground below it. He looked at the surrounding area. And then he looked south, directly south toward where the hollow was. Mara watched from behind a screen of brush, and she felt for the first time since she'd found Dale Mercer hanging from that tree something that was very close to actual fear. Not the useful kind that Henry had taught her to harness, the raw kind. No, because Bishop hadn't found a trail. He'd found the absence of one, and the absence of a trail in a place where there should have been. One was pointing him, compass needle, directly at the one place she needed him to never find. Bishop, Southern. Voice's call came from the north. Bishop, I think it goes north toward the county road. There's marks here. Bishop didn't move. Bishop. He stood there for one more long, breathless moment. Mara gripped the bark of the tree in front of her hard enough that it bit into her palms, and she did not move, did not breathe, did not make herself exist in any way that the world could detect. Bishop turned north. He walked away from the clearing, away from the hollow, away from Dale, without hurrying, without looking back, with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who wasn't done thinking, but had agreed to be interrupted. Mara waited until the sound of him faded completely. Then she waited 5 more minutes on top of that. Then she heard the motorcycles start up one by one, the engines coughing to life in the cold air, and then the sound of them moving away north and east, growing smaller and finally swallowed by the distance. She walked back to the hollow. Dale had been listening to all of it. She could see that in his face, in the tight set of his jaw, and the way his eyes were moving over her, checking for damage, relief, and something harder mixed together in his expression. You did it, he said. They're gone. She settled cross-legged on the ground across from him. Her hands were steadier than she expected them to be. Bishop was close. It wasn't a question. He'd heard it somehow, felt it through the silence. Yes, how close? She thought about lying, decided against it. Close enough Dale rubbed a hand across his face. He looked in that moment every single one of his years, and then some. I need you to understand something, he said. What you just did, what you've been doing for the last 45 minutes, that's not normal. That's not what normal people can do. That's not what most adults can do. He stopped, started again. Who taught you that? All of that? My grandfather, she said. And her voice was even. Henry. She went very still. You said that before in the tree. You said his name like you knew him. Dell looked at her steadily. I did know him. The words arrived in the hollow and rearranged everything. Mara stared at him. Henry Whitlock, she said carefully. You knew Henry Whitlock. I knew Henry Whitlock. His voice had gone quiet, careful, like he was moving something fragile from one place to another. I was 17 years old, and I was standing at the edge of a very bad cliff, and he was the reason I didn't go over it. He paused. He never told you about me. He never told me about a lot of things, she said. Dale nodded slowly, like that was exactly what he'd expected to hear. How did he die? He asked, quiet. 14 months ago. Something crossed Dale Mercer's face. Pain, real and unperformed. He turned his head away for a moment. He was 71, he said. More to himself than to her. Too young. A man like that should have gotten more time. He came back to her. He talked about you, Mara. I hadn't seen him in years, but the last time I did, he talked about you. He said he had a granddaughter who could sit still longer than any person he had ever known and see more in a single look than most people saw in a week. He almost smiled. He wasn't wrong. Mara looked at her hands. He used to say. Dale continued, and his voice was rougher now, carrying weight he'd been holding for a long time, that the strongest student he'd ever teach hadn't been born yet. He looked at her. I think I just met her. The hollow was very quiet around them. Mara breathed in and breathed out. We need to get you out of these woods, she said. Can you walk further now? Dale tested his legs, shifted his weight, gritted his teeth. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I can walk. Good. She stood up, brushed the dirt from her jeans, and held out her hand. Then let's go. He took it, and together, the man with the broken ribs and the 8-year-old girl with her grandfather's eyes, they stepped out of the hollow and into the grey afternoon dot behind them. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine started up again. Single engine this time. Idling. Not moving. Just sitting. Listening. That single engine was the thing that changed everything. Mara heard it the moment they cleared the hollow's edge. Not moving. Not approaching. Just sitting somewhere in the tree line to the northeast. Idling with that low, patient growl that a bike makes when the rider has nowhere to be, and all the time in the world to get there. She stopped walking. Dale felt her stop and stopped with her, his weight shifting on her shoulder, his breath pulling in through his nose, the way it did when he was working through pain and attention at the same time. Bishop, he said, quietly, maybe, not maybe. His voice was flat, certain. The other two are gone. Bishop doesn't leave. I told you he doesn't stop. Mara turned that over in her head. They were 40 yards from the hollow behind them, and maybe 150 yards from the eastern tree line, where the old Harlan service road ran. If they made the service road, she knew a path that cut south toward the Whitlock property without crossing any main road. She'd walked it 100 times. She could walk it in the dark if she had to. The problem was getting there. 150 yards of openish forest, with a man who could barely walk and a waiting engine. That meant someone was watching. He's northeast, she said. The road is east. If we go southeast first, drop down along the creek drainage, we come out south of wherever he's positioned. Dale was quiet for a moment. That adds distance, yes. My ribs, I know. She looked up at him. Can you do it? He worked his jaw. She'd noticed he did that when he was deciding something, that slow jaw work, like he was physically chewing through his options. How far is southeast before we turn? Maybe 60 yards. Then we follow the drainage east for another 80. Then we angle up to the road. 200 yards total. Close to it, he breathed, nodded once hard. Let's move. They moved southeast, slow and deliberate. Mara reading the ground ahead and steering them both. Dale moved better than she'd expected. He'd found a way to hold his left arm against his side that stabilized the broken ribs enough to let him put real weight into each step. And whatever pain it caused him, he was paying without complaint. She could feel it in his grip on her shoulder, the occasional tightening, but he never stopped, and he never made a sound. The engine was still idling, still northeast, still not moving. 40 yards into their arc, Dale's boot came down on a root wrong, and he lurched, catching himself with a sharp intake of breath that was almost a sound, but not quite. Mara braced against his weight without thinking, locked her knees, held. "I got you," she said. "I know," he steadied. "Keep going." They found the drainage, a shallow runoff channel dry this time of year. Its bed packed hard clay and small gravel. Better footing. They turned east along it and Mara felt something ease slightly in her chest because the drainage ran below the grade of the surrounding ground, which meant they were moving in a natural groove that cut their profile down. Anyone watching from height or distance would have a harder time tracking to people moving below the sightline. Henry had taught her about sightlines when she was 6 using a topographic map and a flashlight. She hadn't understood all of it then. She understood it now. "Mara." Dale's voice was low, just above a murmur. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. Okay, is there someone at your house? An adult?" She thought about her mother, Jolene, who would be at the diner until 4, who always came home smelling like coffee and fried food, and who kissed Mara on top of the head every single evening. Was a ritual she'd never break. "My mom. She's at work until 4. What time is it now?" She looked at the sky, the angle of light, the feel of the afternoon. "Maybe 2:30. Is there anyone else? A neighbor, a family friend?" "Why?" He paused. "Because I need a phone and I need somewhere to sit down that isn't a forest floor. And I don't want to walk you into something that gets you hurt. Getting me to my house won't hurt me. Getting Bishop to follow us to your house might." That landed differently. She hadn't been thinking about what came after the woods. She'd been thinking in immediate steps. This problem, then the next problem, then the next. And she'd been so focused on each piece that she hadn't yet assembled the full picture. Dale Mercer sitting in the Whitlock kitchen, while Bishop sat somewhere outside in the dark on a motorcycle that never stopped running. She thought about her mother coming home at 4. Something changed in her stomach. "My mom can't know about this," she said. "Mara, not yet." She kept them moving along the drainage, kept her voice steady. "If she knows, she calls the police. And if the police come, Bishop disappears, and you lose whatever chance you have of." She paused. "What is it you were trying to do? Why were they after you?" Dale was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I have something they want. Information about the Scorpions, their operations, their routes, some names. I've been building it for 2 years, and I was 3 days from handing it to a federal contact when they got to me. You're an informant. I prefer concerned citizen." There was no humor in it, just the habit of a phrase. "Does your club know?" "No." One word carrying about £1,000. "So you're alone in this?" "I was alone in this." He glanced down at her. Present company adjusted. They were 60 yards into the drainage now. 80 to go. "There's a man," Mara said. "Roy Casper. He lives at the south end of our road. He and my grandfather used to they'd play cards on Thursday nights before Henry got sick. He's retired. He's home during the day. He has a landline. Roy Casper trustworthy. Henry trusted him." Another jaw-working pause. "That's enough for me." Mara filed that away too. The way he said it. That flat, complete certainty. Henry's judgment was currency Dale Mercer would cash without counting. They were 30 yards from the eastern slope up to the service road when the engine noise changed. Not loud or different. A shift in RPM. The sound of a bike moving from idle to a slow roll. Tires on gravel. Repositioning. Both of them stopped at the same instant. "He moved," Dale said. "East," Mara said. He went east. The service road ran east-west. If Bishop had moved east along it, he was now positioned somewhere close to where they were planning to come up. Whether that was coincidence or calculation, she couldn't know. And the not knowing was the most dangerous part. He's guessing, Mara said. And she said it with more confidence than she fully felt because the alternative that Bishop had been watching them for the last 10 minutes and was now waiting at the exact spot they were heading was a possibility she needed to set aside until she had evidence for it. Because acting on possibilities you couldn't confirm was how people panicked. Don't panic, Henry said in the back of her head. Panic is just thinking with your fear instead of your brain. We don't go up at the road, she said. Further south there's a field. Dee's old field. It's been mowed 4 years. The fence is down on the east side. We go south another 100 yards, come up through the field, cross the service road in the open fast, and get into the tree cover on the south side before he can reposition. Dale looked at her for a moment. You're talking about crossing in the open for about 15 yards fast. I can't do fast. You can do faster than you think. She met his eyes. I'll go first. If it's clear, I signal you. You move as fast as you can. I'll meet you on the other side. And if it's not clear, then I don't signal and we find another way. She paused. But it will be clear. He's not going to be looking at an open field. He's watching the tree line. Dale studied her face for what felt like a long time. You know what you remind me of, he said. Your grandfather didn't just teach you things. He built you. He said it like a man looking at a structure and understanding for the first time the quality of what went into making it. He built you on purpose. Mara didn't have an answer for that, and she wasn't sure she needed one. Come on, she said. They went south along the drainage, added the extra 100 yards, then climbed the slope into the field. At the field's edge, Mara paused. She read the space the service road 30 yards ahead, the tree line beyond it, the position where the motorcycle engine sound was coming from northeast. She thought stationary again. She turned to Dale. Wait here. Don't move until I wave. He nodded. His face was pale, his jaw set, and in that moment, he looked like someone who'd spent his whole life being the person who went first into dangerous places, being forced to stand back and let an 8-year-old go first instead. She could see what it cost him. I'll be fast, she said. And then she went. She crossed the open ground at a full run, not trying to be subtle about it. Speed being the only tool that mattered here. 15 yards, 12, 8, and she was into the shadow of the southern tree line, and she pressed herself behind the first solid trunk, and she looked northeast and she listened. The engine hadn't changed. He hadn't moved. She stepped out from the tree, raised her arm, and waved. She watched Dale come out of the field at something between a walk and a jog, his left arm clamped to his side, his face hard with effort, covering the ground with everything he had. He was slower than she'd hoped and faster than she'd feared, and when he finally pushed into the tree cover beside her, his breath was ragged, and he leaned against the trunk with his eyes closed for 5 solid seconds before he opened them again. Okay, he said. Okay. You okay? Functional. He straightened, grimaced, straightened again. Keep moving. They moved. Roy Casper's place was 12 minutes away on a normal walk. They did it in 17, which under the circumstances Mara considered close to a miracle. The whole time, the motorcycle engine floated in and out of earshot, sometimes louder, seeming to track north of them along the service road, sometimes fading entirely. And the fading was almost worse than the noise, because at least when she could hear it, she knew where it was. Roy Casper opened his door before they reached the porch. He was 70 years old, built like a fence post with opinions, and he'd seen enough in his life that the sight of a beat-up biker and an 8-year-old appearing out of his backfield didn't cause him to do anything except open the door wider and say, "Get in the house." That was it. Just get in the house. Mara loved Roy Casper for that. Inside. Roy took one look at Dale and said, "Sit down before you fall down," and pointed at the kitchen table. Dale sat. Roy put a glass of water in front of him, looked at the bruising visible at Dale's collar and the dried blood on his temple, and said to Mara, "Your mother know where you are?" "No, sir. She will in about 20 minutes. I'm calling her after he makes his call." He looked at Dale. "You need a doctor or a phone first." "Phone," Dale said. Please. Roy set the old black handset on the table without a word and went to the kitchen counter and started making coffee like men showed up at his door, half dead on a regular basis. Dale dialed from memory. 7 digits, no area code, which meant local or memorized long ago. He waited. His whole body changed when someone picked up a subtle shift of bracing like he was adjusting for impact. "It's Mercer," he said. "I'm alive. I need you to listen and not talk. I have maybe 5 minutes before I don't trust this line anymore." A pause. "The Scorpions have Bishop running the operation. He had 6 months more planning on this than we thought. The route change we talked about, it's not a change. It's a permanent shift. And the names on the manifest are clean fronts. All of them. I have the actual names. I have the dates. I have." He stopped, listened. Something moved through his face during another pause, longer. "How bad?" His hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. Okay. I understand. Don't send anyone to me. I'll make contact when I can move." "Yes." A pause. "Yes, I know." Then quieter. "Tell her I'm okay." He put the phone down. Roy poured coffee without looking up. Dale stared at the table for a long moment. "Your contact?" Mara asked. "My contact." He rubbed his eye with the back of his hand. "They already knew I was taken. They've been watching Bishop for 3 days. But they couldn't move without blowing the whole operation." His voice was careful, flat. The voice of a person delivering news to themselves that they hadn't fully absorbed yet. "They think Bishop knows about the federal angle." The room was very quiet. "What does that mean?" Mara said. "It means Bishop wasn't just trying to kill me." Dale looked up at her. "He was trying to find out what I'd already passed and who I'd passed it to. He needed me alive long enough to talk. Then dead." He paused. "Which means when I didn't talk and when I disappeared instead of being found where he left me." He stopped again. "He knows someone helped you," Mara finished. "And he knows that someone is still between him and what he needs." Dale held her eyes. "He's not going to stop looking, Mara. Not tomorrow. Not next week. He's going to pull on every thread until something gives." Roy set a mug of coffee in front of Dale and then turned and looked at Mara with the steady weathered look of a man who'd been holding hard truths his whole life and knew how to deliver. "1. Your mama needs to know," he said. "Roy," he said again. No louder, no harder, just certain. "This is past what you carry alone, and you've been carrying it long enough today. Let it be somebody else's turn for a minute." He paused. "Henry would say the same thing. You know he would." Mara looked at the floor. She did know that. Henry had always said that strength wasn't never asking for help. Strength was knowing exactly when to ask, and not being too proud to do it. She was 8 years old, and she had carried it for 4 hours, and she realized exhausted in a way that went all the way to the bottom of her. "Call her," she said. Roy reached for the phone, and that was when they heard it. A motorcycle engine. Close, much closer than it had been. Not on the service road on the county road out front, the one that ran directly past Roy Casper's mailbox. It slowed as it passed the house, not stopping, just slowing. The engine pulling down to a near idle for the length of the property, and then picking back up. It continued south. Dale was on his feet before the sound faded. He was across the kitchen and 2 steps back against the wall beside the window, not looking out, knowing better than to look out. His whole body had changed again. That shift back into the braced, ready thing, and Mara saw his right hand move to his hip, where a holster might have been, and find nothing, and his jaw tighten at the finding. "He made us," Dale said. Roy Casper had put down the phone. He was very still, very calm, with the stillness of a man who'd been in bad situations before and come through them by not wasting energy on panic. He looked at Dale. "Son, how bad is this man?" "Bad enough that you shouldn't have opened your door," Dale said. And there was honest regret in it. Roy considered that for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked down the hallway toward the back of the house. He came back 30 seconds later with a shotgun and a box of shells. He set them on the table, sat down, picked up his coffee. "Well," he said, "I've been bored all week." Dale stared at him. Something moved in his face, that was halfway between disbelief and a kind of desperate, painful gratitude. You don't have to. Henry Whitlock sat at that table every Thursday for 11 years, Roy said, pointing at the exact chair Dale was standing next to. His granddaughter is standing in my kitchen. Don't tell me what I have to do. He sipped his coffee. Now sit down. Let's figure out what Bishop wants and how we're going to make sure he doesn't get it. Dale sat down. Mara sat down. The motorcycle had gone quiet outside. That was worse. The silence outside was the kind that pressed against the walls. Roy Casper's kitchen had a clock above the refrigerator that ticked loud enough to hear in any quiet room. And right now, Mara could hear every single tick like a small hammer on a nail. 14 seconds passed. 20. Nobody at the table moved. Dale was watching the front window from the side of his eye, not turning his head, not giving anyone outside anything to read in his pasture. Roy had his hand resting on the stock of the shotgun without gripping it, the practiced non-grip of a man who knew the difference between ready and tense. Mara was watching the back door. Nobody else was watching the back door, and that felt like an omission that mattered. She got up, quietly, moved to the hallway, positioned herself where she could see both the back door and the reflection in the dark screen of Roy's old television set, which gave her a partial angle on the front window. Henry had taught her that too. Always find the view that gives you two things at once, Mara. Dale's voice was a murmur. I'm watching the back, she said, just as quiet. She felt rather than saw Roy nod approvingly. 30 seconds. 40. Then the knock came at the front door. Not a pound, not an aggressive cop knocker, measured, unhurried rap of knuckles. 3 times, patient, the knock of someone who wasn't in a hurry, because they already knew nobody was going anywhere. The 3 of them held still. The knock came again. Same rhythm, same patience. Roy stood up slowly and Dale's hand shot out and caught his arm. Roy looked at him. Dale shook his head. Roy looked at the hand on his arm, then back at Dale's face, and something passed between them. The quiet argument of 2 men deciding who was in charge of this moment, and Roy settled back into his chair, which was its own kind of answer. Roy Casper. The voice came through the door, clearly, conversationally, the voice of a man who understood projection. The quiet voice. Bishop, I know you're in there, and I know you have company. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just need 5 minutes with my associate. Dale's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they were flat and decided. Don't, Mara said, and both men looked at her. Don't answer and don't open the door. If he wanted to come in, he'd have come in. He's knocking because he wants you to come out. Dale stared at her. She's right, he said. Half to himself. Of course she's right, Roy said. Roy Casper. Bishop's voice again. Still patient, still unhurried. I'm aware you're a friend of the Whitlock family. I have no business with you or with the child. This is between me and Dale Mercer, and I'd appreciate you not making it into something larger than it is. Mara felt the temperature in the room change when Bishop said her grandfather's name. Not because it was threatening. It wasn't, not overtly, but because it meant he'd done more work faster than she'd expected. He knew Roy. He knew the Whitlock connection. In the time it had taken them to walk 17 minutes through the woods, Bishop had assembled enough information to arrive at this specific door. That was not a slow man working. That was a very fast mind with very good sources. He knows who I am, she said quietly. Yeah, Dale's voice had gone tight. He knows. How? Dale rubbed the back of his neck. Because he planned this. He's had people in Harlan 4 weeks, Mara, weeks learning the layout, the connections, who knows who. I didn't understand how deep it went until just now. He looked at her, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen there before. Guilt, real and uncomfortable, sitting on him like a weight. He was never just going to kill me and leave. He was building a map of everyone around me, which means he already knew about you, Roy said to Mara. Flat fact. No dramatics. Not about me specifically, she said, working it out as she spoke. But he knew Henry. He knew Henry had family here. When Dale disappeared instead of being found, he started pulling that thread. She paused. He tracked us from the clearing. Maybe not visually, But he worked out the same logic I worked out about the sightlines, ran it backward, and came to Roy. Smart kid, Roy said. And it didn't sound like a compliment so much as an accurate assessment. So is he, she said. And that didn't sound like a compliment either. Outside. Bishop tried one more time. Last offer, Dale. Come out. We talk 5 minutes. We settle this between ourselves. Nobody else gets touched. You have my word? Roy's eyebrow moved a fraction of an inch. His word. A man who hung people upside down from trees was offering his word. Dale leaned forward, put both elbows on the table, pressed his hands flat against the wood. Here's the problem, he said. And Mara could tell he was talking to himself as much as to them, working through it out loud. Bishop doesn't bluff. When he says nobody else gets touched, he means it as long as I comply. But if I go out that door, I don't come back from it. And if I don't go out, he stopped. He has no reason to hurt a retired old man and a little girl. Roy finished, not unkindly. Unless we give him one. What he actually wants, Mara said, is the information, the names, the routes, what Dale built. If he gets that, we're liabilities. If he doesn't get it, we're leverage. Both men looked at her. She's describing it exactly right, Dale said quietly. So the information is what keeps us safe, Roy said. As long as it exists and he doesn't have it, Mara said. Yes, Roy stood up. He picked up the shotgun. He walked to the front door and opened it. In the cold afternoon air pushed through from outside, and there on the porch, 3 feet back from the threshold, stood Bishop. He was not what Mara had pictured from the sound of him. She built him in her mind as large that voice suggested size, command, physical dominance. But the man on the porch was lean, medium height, maybe 50, with a face that had been weathered into a kind of permanent stillness, the wayward goes when it's been exposed to too many seasons. His eyes were dark, and they moved the moment the door opened, cataloguing the room in a single sweep. Roy with the shotgun, Dale at the table, Mara standing in the hallway. They stopped on Mara, and held there for just a half second longer than they held anywhere else. Then they went back to Dale. You look like you've been having a rough day, Bishop said to him, and he said it completely without expression, which was somehow more unsettling than any tone would have been. You'd know, Dale said. Bishop looked at Roy and the shotgun with an expression of calm assessment, the way a man looks at weather conditions before deciding whether to bring an umbrella. Mr. Casper, I'd appreciate if we could speak without that in the room. I'd appreciate a lot of things, Roy said pleasantly. We're both going to be disappointed. Something moved in Bishop's face, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. He looked back at Dale. You made your call, I did. Then you know it doesn't change things. Whatever you passed, it's incomplete. They can't move on incomplete information, and we both know it. He tilted his head slightly. Where's the rest of it, Dale? The physical records, not the call. The actual records, gone. No, they're not. A silence opened between them. Mara watched Dale's face during it and saw something she didn't expect. A flicker of something that wasn't confidence. Something that looked like a man recalculating against an opponent who just revealed he knew more than expected. Bishop saw it too. Of course he did. 2 years of work, Bishop said. A man like you doesn't keep 2 years of work in his head and nowhere else. You wrote it down. You kept copies somewhere close because you needed access to it. Needed to be able to add to it. Somewhere you thought was safe. He paused. Somewhere around here. Dale said nothing. I'm not going to search every house in Harlan County, Bishop said. I don't need to. His dark eyes moved to Mara briefly, precisely. The man who built the information trusted one person completely. He's gone now, but he left something behind. The blood went very still in Mara's veins. He wasn't talking about Dale's records anymore. My grandfather didn't know anything about Dale's work, Mara said, and her voice came out steady, which she was proud of and would think about later. He died 14 months ago. He did, Bishop agreed. But the things a man like Henry Whitlock knew didn't die with him. He kept his eyes on her, and there was nothing cruel in them, which was the thing that made them frightening. They were just assessing, precise and impersonal. He was the one who set Dale on this path. 20 years ago. Henry Whitlock walked up to a 19-year-old kid who was about to do something very bad and changed the direction of his life. Everything Dale did after that, including the 2 years of work, it was downstream of Henry. He paused. So when I needed to understand Dale, I needed to understand Henry. And when I understood Henry, you came into it, Mara said. I came into it. He confirmed. Dale was on his feet. His chair scraped back hard, and he was standing despite the ribs, despite everything. And his voice, when it came out, had completely abandoned the careful measured register he'd been using and had become something older and raw. You leave her alone. Whatever you think Henry left, whatever you think she knows, she's 8 years old, and she's not part of this. She never was. She made herself part of it, Bishop said. And he said it without accusation, almost with something like respect. In the woods, she made herself part of it. She's a child. She's extraordinary. Bishop said it simply, factually, the way he'd said everything, and extraordinary things run in lines. Henry was extraordinary. You told me that yourself once, a long time ago. Before all of this, he tilted his head again. What did he teach her, Dale? What did Henry Whitlock spend 3 years putting inside this child? The question fell into the room, and nobody answered it. And the not answering was its own kind of answer. Roy shifted the shotgun. I think, he said in the calm voice of a man who'd made a decision, you've said about everything you came to say, and I think it's time for you to get off my property. Bishop looked at him. Mr. Casper, I'm 70 years old, Roy said. I have bad knees, a decent pension, and no living relatives who'd miss me terribly. I'm not a man with a lot to lose, and I'm telling you to get off my property. Another one of those long reading silences. Bishop reading Roy holding steady under it, not performing, not pretending, just being exactly what he was, an old man who meant exactly what he said. Bishop took one step back from the threshold. This isn't resolved, he said to the room generally. To Dale specifically. No, Dale agreed. It isn't. I'll be close. Roy closed the door, stood with his hand on it for a moment, then walked back to the table, set the shotgun down, and picked up his coffee like he'd only stepped away to check the weather. Dale sat back down. He looked like the last 10 minutes had cost him physically the energy of standing and holding himself upright, while his body was actively protesting. And now that the door was closed, the cost was showing on his face. Mara came back from the hallway. She sat down at the table. The three of them were quiet for a moment, in the way people are quiet after something passes that could have gone differently. He's not leaving, Dale said. No, Roy agreed. And he's right that the call wasn't enough. My contact needs the physical records to move forward. Dale pressed his palms flat on the table again. That gesture she'd noticed before, like he was grounding himself through the wood. If I can't get those records to a federal contact in the next, he checked the battered watch. 18 hours. The window closes. The Scorpions move the operation, burn the trail, and 2 years of work disappears into nothing. Where are the records? Mara asked. Dale looked at her. Where are they? She said again. Why, Mara? Because you're not going to get to them. Not tonight. Not in your condition. Not with Bishop sitting 50 yards up the road. She held his eyes. But I might. The kitchen clock ticked. Roy put his coffee down with a small, careful sound. No, Dale said. Tell me where they are, Mara said. Dale rubbed his face with both hands. When he dropped them, he looked at her with an expression that had too many layers to name. Exhaustion, gratitude, fear for her, fear of the situation, and underneath all of it, a helpless recognition that she was right and he didn't have a better option, and he'd been in this position with her before, exactly this position earlier today, and she had been right then too. Storage unit, he said. Clement self-storage on Route 9, Unit 44, combination lock, left 3 times to 27, right twice to 14, left once to 32. He held her eyes. There's a grey metal box inside, taped to the back wall behind a pile of boxes. Inside the metal box is a hard drive and 3 folders. The hard drive goes in a yellow envelope. There's a stamp and an address already on it from the post office. The folders go in a separate blue envelope. Same address. You drop them both in a mailbox, and they'll get to where they need to go. How far is Route 9? About a mile and a half. Is there another way Bishop knows about that unit? I paid cash under a different name, he paused. But Bishop is thorough, Mara said. I know. How long has the unit been rented? 8 months. Then he hasn't found it yet, or he'd already have the records. And this conversation would be different. She stood up. I need 10 minutes to get there and back before my mom comes home. Roy looked at the clock. Your mama gets off at 4. It's 3:12. 48 minutes. I can do it in 40, Mara said. Roy reached into his kitchen drawer and pulled out a bicycle key on a worn ring. Shed out back, he said. Faster than walking. Mara took the key. Dale caught her wrist gently, but firmly, and she stopped. She looked at his hand on her wrist and then at his face. And what was on his face was the pure and guarded look of a man who'd already lost one important person and was being asked to let another one walk into danger. And it was costing him something. There's a man, he said carefully, at the storage facility. His name is Gerald. He's the manager. Tell him Dale sent you. He'll know what it means. Is Gerald safe? Gerald owes me 3 years of rent paid on time, Dale said. That makes a man pretty reliable. She almost smiled. Okay, Mara. He held her wrist one more second. If anything at all feels wrong when you get there, if anyone is watching that you don't recognize, if a car is parked wrong, if the lock feels like it's been touched, you leave. You leave and you come back here. The records aren't worth you. You understand me? She looked at him steadily. I understand you. He let go of her wrist. She took the key and went out the back. The bike was old and the chain needed oil, but it moved, and Mara moved it hard, standing on the pedals down the back lane that ran parallel to the county road, staying off the road itself, feeling the cold air hit her face. Her legs burned. She didn't mind the burn. Burning meant moving, and moving meant doing the thing that needed doing, and doing the thing that needed doing was the only answer to any problem Henry Whitlock had ever accepted. She got to Clement's self-storage in 11 minutes. Gerald was a heavy-set man in his late 50s who was watching a small television behind a plexiglass window when she came through the door, and he looked at her with a mild irritation of someone interrupted, which evaporated the moment she said the words Dale sent me. Gerald turned the television off. He looked at her for a long measuring moment. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a flashlight and handed it through the gap in the plexiglass window. Unit 44 is in the back row, he said. When you're done, come back here. Don't leave through the main gate. She took the flashlight. Thank you. She found Unit 44, worked the combination the way Dale had given it. Left 3 to 27, right twice to 14, left once to 32, and felt the lock release with a clean click. The roll door went up. The unit was dim and smelled like old cardboard, and she went in with the flashlight, moved the boxes from the back wall, found the grey metal box exactly where Dale said it would be, taped at waist height behind the second row. She peeled the tape, opened the box, found the hard drive and the 3 folders and the 2 pre-addressed envelopes. She was packing the envelopes when she heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Not Gerald's footsteps. The rhythm was wrong. The weight distribution wrong, to care for someone who belonged here. She killed the flashlight, stood still in the dark. The footsteps stopped outside Unit 40-4. Mara held the 2 envelopes against her chest and breathed so slowly it barely counted as breathing, and she heard through the thin metal wall of the storage unit the distinctive sound of a motorcycle boot shifting weight on gravel. He'd found it. She didn't know how. She might never know how. But Bishop had found Unit 44, and she was inside it in the dark, holding 2 years of work, and the only evidence that could bring down the Scorpions. And the only thing between her and him was a thin metal roll door she had not locked behind her when she came in. She hadn't locked it. The footsteps moved again, slow, coming around to the front of the unit. Mara looked at the roll door at the darkness, at the envelopes in her hands. She made a decision. She reached out and grabbed the roll door handle from the inside, and she pulled it down hard, as fast as she could, and she snapped the combination lock shut from the inside in the dark. And the sound of the lock clicking closed was the loudest thing she had ever heard in her life. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then Bishop's voice right outside the door. 2 feet away, still water. Well, he said, that was unexpected. The dark inside Unit 44 was absolute. Mara stood with her back against the rear wall, the 2 envelopes pressed flat against her chest, the combination lock engaged, and she counted her own heartbeats, the way Henry had taught her to do when the world was moving too fast, and she needed to slow it down to something manageable. 1, 2, 3. Her heart was doing about 90 beats a minute, which under the circumstances, she considered reasonable. Bishop hadn't moved. She could feel his stillness through the metal door, the way you feel weather coming before it arrives. A pressure, a quality of attention that had weight. He wasn't rattling the door. He wasn't shouting. He was just standing there, 2 feet away on the other side of a thin sheet of corrugated steel. And his patience was the most frightening thing about him. You don't have to be scared, he said. The same conversational tone, like they were picking up a discussion that had briefly paused. I told Dale, and I'll tell you, I'm not here to hurt anyone who isn't trying to hurt me. Mara said nothing. The lock you just put between us is a master number 3. I have the key. A pause. I found it on the unit registration. Gerald keeps duplicates. Another pause. Longer. I'm not going to use it. I want you to understand that I could open this door in about 4 seconds and I'm choosing not to. Mara looked at the lock, looked at the door, thought about 4 seconds. She thought about what was in her hands to envelopes. 2 years of Dale's work. The thing Bishop needed. And the thing she needed to get out of this building. She thought about Gerald. Gerald, who had given her a flashlight and told her not to leave through the main gate, which meant there was another way out, which meant Gerald had thought about this moment before it arrived, which meant Gerald was smarter than he looked behind that plexiglass window. She clicked the flashlight back on and turned around slowly and looked at the back wall of the unit. It was a shared wall with the adjacent unit. Standard storage facility construction, prefabricated metal panels bolted together. Designed to be assembled fast, not to be impenetrable. The bottom panel had a gap where it met the concrete floor, maybe 3 inches, where the panel had settled unevenly over time. 3 inches wasn't enough, but the panel itself was only held by 4 bolts along the side rail, and one of them, the bottom one near the floor, was missing, which left the lower corner of the panel loose enough to flex when she pushed it. You're looking for another way out, Bishop said through the door. Still calm. The back panel, Unit 43 on the other side, is empty. Gerald rents it alongside 44 to keep the buffer. He told me that when I asked him 20 minutes ago. Mara stopped pushing on the panel. 20 minutes ago. He'd been to Gerald 20 minutes ago, while she was still at Roy Casper's house, which meant he hadn't followed her here. He'd already been here. He'd worked out the storage unit independently, arrived before her and waited. He'd let her go in. He'd let her collect the records, and then he'd positioned himself outside, while she locked herself in with everything he needed. The realization arrived like a door closing. Clean and final. You let me get the records, she said. Her voice came out steady, and she was glad of it. I did. Because you couldn't get them yourself, without Dale's combination. Gerald has a master key for the lock, but not the contents. The box was combination locked separately. A brief pause. You just saved me a significant amount of time. Mara looked at the envelopes in her hands, looked at the door, thought hard and fast the way Henry had trained her, not panicking, not freezing, but moving through the options, the way you move through a checklist, crossing off what doesn't work until you find what does. Option 1. Open the door and run. He'd said he wouldn't hurt her, and she almost believed that, but almost wasn't enough. And she had no guarantee of what happened after he had the envelopes in his hands. Option 2, wait him out. Not viable. He had the duplicate key and limitless patience. and she had maybe 30 minutes before her mother arrived at Roy Casper's house, and the entire situation escalated beyond anything she could contain. Option 3. Negotiate. Henry had always said negotiation was the highest form of problem solving, not because it was kind, because it was efficient. You got what you needed without spending what you couldn't afford. What happens after you have the records? She asked. A brief pause. She'd surprised him slightly. She could hear it in the half-second before he answered. The information becomes controlled. The operation continues quietly. Nobody goes to prison, and nobody else gets hurt. Dale goes to prison. Dale made his choices. You were going to kill him. A longer pause this time. That decision was made above me. I'm the one who slowed it down. I needed him talking, not dead. The others were less patient. He said it without defensiveness. Just explanation. Dale is alive right now, Mara said. Partly because I managed that situation more carefully than my associates would have. Mara turned that over. It had the texture of something true, which didn't make it comfortable. So you're not the most dangerous one. I'm the most capable one. There's a difference. She looked at the envelopes again. The pre-addressed ones already stamped, already addressed to Dale's federal contact. All she needed was a mailbox. Any mailbox within a quarter mile, and the records were beyond anyone's reach. She needed him away from the door for 90 seconds. What does Bishop mean? She asked. The pause that followed was the longest one yet. She'd hit something that landed differently, and she'd done it on purpose the way Henry had. Taught her to ask the personal question when you needed to change the temperature of a conversation. It's a road name, he said finally. I know what a road name is, but why Bishop specifically? Another pause. My grandfather was a chess player. He said the bishop was the most underestimated piece on the board, because people always looked at the king and the queen first. But the bishop controlled the diagonals. It moved in ways people didn't anticipate. The voice through the door was still controlled, still measured, but something in it had shifted slightly. A degree of temperature, a loosening of something. He called me that when I was about your age. My grandfather played chess, Mara said. Silence. He was good at it, she continued. He tried to teach me, but I always wanted to skip ahead to the end game. He said I was impatient about the middle game. She paused deliberately. He said the middle game was where everything real happened, that anyone could start strong and anyone could finish, but the middle was where you found out what a person was actually made of. The quiet outside the door was a different quality now, still present, still watchful, but something in its texture had shifted. He sounds like he was worth knowing, Bishop said. He was. She looked at the envelopes, looked at the door. He would have found you interesting. I think he liked people who were smarter than they appeared. Did he find many of those? Not many. She moved to the side of the unit very quietly, just a steps, so she was no longer directly behind the door. He said most people were exactly as smart as they looked and about half as smart as they thought. She paused. He found Dale interesting. He spent time on Dale. I know. I've spent some time understanding that relationship. Why? She kept her voice natural, kept the conversation moving, kept him listening. Why does it matter to you, the work, the records, that strategy? But you spent months understanding Henry. That's something else, a beat. Because I needed to understand why a man like Dale, someone who'd spent 30 years inside the life, would choose to burn it. What was strong enough to turn him? Henry was the answer, but I needed to understand what Henry was. He paused. What made him the way he was? And do you, she asked, understand it? I think so. He believed in people before they deserved it. He paid that belief forward and expected the person to grow into it. Another pause. It's a rare thing. Most people believe in what they can see. Henry believed in what could be. Mara had moved another step sideways. She was at the corner of the unit now, as far from the door as the space allowed. She pressed the two envelopes flat inside her jacket, tucking them against her stomach, and zipped the jacket up over them. Her hands were steady. He believed in me, she said. I know. Before I deserved it, too. She kept her voice even. I'm 8. I haven't done anything yet, but he treated me like the person was going to be. not the person I was. She paused. Dale told me he said the same thing about me that he said about Dale, that the strongest student he'd ever teach hadn't been born yet. The silence outside stretched out. Bishop, she said. And she said his name directly, deliberately. The way you say a name when you want to make a moment real. What would Henry say to you right now if he were standing here instead of me? The question fell into the space between them, and she felt it land. No response came immediately. In the absence of the instant controlled answer was itself an answer. She'd gotten through the armor, not all the way, but far enough to find something underneath that wasn't Bishop the strategist or Bishop the Scorpion's operation manager. Something older and more complicated. She took a breath and she moved, not toward the door, away from it to the back corner, where the loose panel was. She hit it low and hard with her shoulder, not trying to break through the bolt, but torquing the whole lower corner outward, and the panel flexed, the loose corner lifting off the floor, and she dropped flat and went through the gap in one fast committed movement, the envelopes inside her jacket, her elbows taking the scrape of the concrete floor, and she was through into Unit 43 before the sound of the panel snapping back had finished echoing. Unit 43 was empty and dark. She found the door by memory, 10 feet ahead of the roll mechanism, and she didn't unlock it. She didn't pull it up, because it would make noise. Gerald had said there was another way out. She swept the flashlight fast across the walls. There a pass-through door low in the south wall, padlocked from this side. She had the lock open in 8 seconds. A simple brass padlock, the kind Henry had made her practice on 100 times, because he said cheap locks were everywhere, and knowing them was basic literacy. She went through. She was behind the facility now, between the back wall of the building and the chain-link fence. And Roy's bicycle was exactly where she left it, leaned against the fence near the back gate, because Gerald had told her not to use the main gate and she'd been paying attention. She heard the roll door of Unit 44 go up behind her. She grabbed the bike and she went. She didn't look back. Looking back was for people who had time for it, and she did not have time. She went over the back gate, lifted the bike with her, dropped it on the other side, mounted it moving, and she was on the back lane heading west before the sound of gravel under her tires had time to echo. Her legs worked. Her lungs worked. The envelopes pressed against her stomach, warm from her body heat, and she could feel them there, the way you feel something important with more than just your skin. She was a quarter mile out when she saw the mailbox. A simple residential mailbox on a wooden post at the end of someone's driveway. Flag up, which meant the mail hadn't rung yet, which meant anything put inside would be collected today. She stopped the bike, pulled out the 2 envelopes, looked at the address, a federal P.O. box in Nashville, Tennessee, handwritten in Dale's careful printing. Stamps already on, sealed already, everything ready, everything waiting for this exact moment. She put them in the mailbox. She raised the flag. She got back on the bike. She didn't feel what she expected to feel. She thought there would be some dramatic internal shift, some sense of completion. Instead, she felt very ordinary and very tired and very cold. And somewhere underneath that, she felt something small and quiet that she didn't have a name for yet. The feeling of having done a thing that needed doing and having done it right. And she thought that was probably what Henry had felt every day for the 30 years he'd spent putting things right that needed putting right. She thought, I think I understand you now, Grandpa. I think I finally get it. Then she rode back to Roy Casper's house. Dale was standing on Roy's back porch when she came through the gate. He was pale and braced against the porch railing, and he'd clearly been standing there long enough that it was costing him, holding himself upright on will alone, waiting. When he saw her, something so large and physical moved through him that he had to grip the railing to keep himself steady, and he closed his eyes. For one long second. Done, he said when he opened them. Done. The envelopes in a mailbox on Daring Lane. They'll be collected today. He let out a breath that had been building for what looked like a very long time. Bishop, he said. He knows. She parked the bike against the porch steps. He let me get the records. He knew I'd collect them, and he thought he could intercept me inside the unit. She looked up at Dale. I went out the back. Dale stared at her. Through the panel. Through the panel. He put his hand over his eyes, pressed it there for a moment. When he dropped it, his face was a complicated landscape of relief and residual fear and something else. A wondering kind of look of a man seeing something he'd been told about, but had to see himself to fully believe. He let you walk away, Dale said. He didn't stop me. I don't know if that's the same thing with Bishop. It is. Dale shook his head slowly. He had the duplicate key. He could have opened that door any time. He paused. What did you say to him in there? Mara thought about the question, thought about the conversation through the metal door, the careful personal thread she'd pulled, the name that wasn't his name, but the name he carried from his grandfather, the chess piece that moved in ways people didn't anticipate. I asked him what Henry would say to him. She said. Dale went very still. I think it made him. She searched for the right word. Remember something about why people do things, about what the things they do mean. She paused. I don't know if it'll hold. I don't know if he'll come back. He'll come back, Dale said. But he'll come back different. He looked at her steadily. What you did to him in there. What you just told me, that's not a tactic. That's not a technique. Henry could do that. He could find the thing inside a person that was still trying to be decent and speak directly to it. He shook his head again. He built you to do this. The back door opened and Roy looked out. He took in Mara, took in the bike, took in Dale's face, and assembled the story from those pieces in about 2 seconds. Done. Done, Mara said. Good. Come inside. He looked at Dale. You to sit down before you fall down. They went inside. The kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee, and the clock above the refrigerator was ticking toward 4. And Mara realized with a start that she had less than 15 minutes before her mother pulled into Roy's driveway, because Roy had said he'd call her. And Roy kept his word. And Roy had kept his word, because when she sat down, she could hear a car on the county road slowing, turning, and the crunch of gravel under tires. She looked at Dale. He looked back. Your mom, he said. My mom. She agreed. And right on cue, the front door opened without a knock, because Harlan Whitlock did not knock when her daughter was inside, and she came through the door in her diner uniform, with her coat half on, and her key still in her hand, and her face doing about 7 things at once: fear, relief, confusion, and the particular maternal fury that lives right next to love, and is often mistaken for it. She looked at Dale. She looked at the shotgun on the table. She looked at Roy. She looked at Mara and Whitlock, she said. Her voice was very quiet. The quiet was worse than loud would have been. Someone is going to explain to me what is happening in this kitchen right now. Roy stood up. Harlan, he said. And his voice was gentle in a way Mara hadn't heard before from him. Sit down. I'll pour you a cup and we'll tell you everything start to finish. He paused. It's a long story. Harlan looked at her daughter one more time. Read her face, the way mothers read faces, the deep fluent reading of someone who has memorized every variation. Are you hurt? No. Ma'am, are you okay? Mara thought about that question honestly. I think so, she said. I think I will be. Harlan sat down. Roy poured the coffee. Dale laced his hands together on the table and looked at the grain of the wood and began. Outside the afternoon had gone grey and still. No motorcycle, no engine sound, just the county road empty and quiet, and the mailbox on Daring Lane with its flag still raised. 2 envelopes inside waiting for the mail truck to come. 4 miles south on the edge of the Harlan town limits, a motorcycle sat idling at a crossroads. The man on it didn't move for a long time. He sat with his hands on the grips and looked at the road ahead, and then at the road behind, and then at the place where the roads crossed each other and divided into 4 directions. He sat there long enough that a passing driver slowed down, thinking he might need help, and then the driver got a look at the man's face and decided he did not need anything from any of them, and drove on. After a while, Bishop put the bike in gear. He didn't go back toward Roy Casper's house. He turned north. And in Roy Casper's kitchen, Dale Mercer told Harlan Whitlock the truth from the beginning. All of it. And the telling took 40 minutes. And at the end of it, the kitchen was very quiet, and Harlan was looking at her daughter, the way people look at things they thought they knew and have just understood they never fully did. "Henry," she said. Just his name, just a single word. And inside it was everything: the years, the lessons, the early mornings in the yard, the knots and the chess and the silence training and all of it. All the pieces she'd watched her father put into her daughter without fully understanding what he was building. "Yeah," Dale said quietly. "Henry." Harlan reached across the table and took Mara's hand. She held it for a long moment without speaking. Mara let her hold it and didn't pull away. Roy refilled everyone's coffee. The clock ticked, and somewhere in the grey Harlan afternoon, a mail truck turned onto Daring Lane and moved slowly along its route, stopping at each box, lifting each flag, collecting what had been left to be carried forward. Asterisk. Unit 44 stood empty and locked on Route 9. The combination lock hung on the closed door, and no one would open it today, or the day after that, or any day that mattered. The grey metal box inside was empty, its tape hanging loose from the back wall. The absence of what it had held cleaner and more final than any presence could have been. The thing Dale had built over 2 years was moving now, moving toward the people who needed it, moving through the ordinary machinery of stamps and addresses in a mail truck on a Mara County road in a small town that most people had never heard of, and sitting at Roy Casper's kitchen table. An 8-year-old girl, Mara Whitlock, drank half a cup of coffee that Roy poured for her over her mother's mild objection, and she felt the warmth of it settle in her chest. And she looked at Dale and at Roy, and at her mother, and she thought about her grandfather, not with the ache that had lived in her since he died, but with something that felt for the first time like continuity, like he wasn't gone so much as extended, carried forward in the things he'd put inside her. The way a letter carries the person who wrote it into the hands of the person who reads it. She thought the strongest student he'd ever teach. She thought, "I think he was right." She thought, "I think I'm just getting started." 3 days passed before Dale Mercer could walk without gripping something. He spent those 3 days in Roy Casper's spare bedroom, which smelled like cedar and old paperbacks and had a window that looked out over the backfield. And Roy fed him soup and black coffee and exactly zero sympathy, which was somehow the most comfortable arrangement Dale could have imagined. Roy didn't ask him questions he couldn't answer, and didn't offer him reassurances that weren't true. And that kind of honesty Dale had learned over 50-some years was rarer than most people understood. Harlan had wanted to call the police that first night. She'd made the case clearly, and without drama, sitting at Roy's kitchen table with her coffee going cold, laying out the logic the way a woman does when she's thought it through completely before speaking. There was an injured man. There were criminals. There was a federal case in motion. There were proper channels. Dale had listened to all of it. And then he'd said quietly, "The moment a local badge makes contact, the Scorpions know the case is active, and they burn the trail. My federal contact needs 72 hours to build the receiving end before anyone moves. 72 hours. And then you can call every agency in the state." Harlan had looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Roy. Then she'd looked at Mara, who was sitting very straight in her chair drinking coffee. She was too young for, and not saying anything. And something in Mara's face had settled whatever Harlan was still arguing with inside herself. 72 hours, Harlan said. Not asking. 72 hours. Dale confirmed. Harlan had nodded once. She had not looked happy about it, and she hadn't pretended to. And Dale had respected that too. The refusal to perform acceptance she didn't feel. Henry had built a good family. Not a simple one. A good one. Mara came by Roy's house every afternoon after school. She didn't announce herself, and she didn't knock loudly. She just appeared the way she'd been appearing in unexpected places since this whole thing started. And she'd sit in the chair by Dale's window and they'd talk. Or sometimes they didn't talk. Sometimes she'd just do her homework at the small desk in the corner while Dale rested, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind. The kind that people who've been through something together can sustain without discomfort. On the second afternoon, she brought a chess set, an old one, wooden pieces. The board worn smooth at the corners from years of use. Dale looked at it when she set it on the table between them. Henry's, his father's actually. Henry said the pieces had been through 3 wars and never lost a single one. She set up the board with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. He said that was a better record than most armies. Dale watched her arrange the pieces. His ribs still pulled when he breathed deep. A reminder that kept him honest about what the last week had actually contained. Do you know how he played? What his style was? Patient, Mara said without hesitating. He never attacked before the position was completely ready. He used to say that a premature attack just tells your opponent what you're afraid of. She placed the last piece, the king, always the last, and looked up. He always opened with the same first move every single game, no matter who he was playing. What was the move? Pawn to e4. She paused. He said it was honest. It said exactly what he intended and dared the other person to deal with it. She considered the board. Bishop told me his grandfather was a chess player. He said the bishop was the most underestimated piece because it moved in ways people didn't expect. Dale was quiet for a moment. You told me that in the kitchen. I've been thinking about it since. She touched the bishop piece on the board lightly without moving it. The bishop moves in diagonals. It never goes straight, but it covers a lot of ground. She looked at Dale. Do you think he was always like that, or did something make him that way? Dale thought about it honestly. I think he was always smart, he said. I think something made him put that smart in the service of the wrong people. He paused. Same way something could have made me stay wrong. Henry hadn't come along when he did. Mara nodded slowly. So the difference between you and Bishop is Henry. That's one way to put it. It doesn't seem fair, she said. No. Dale looked at the chessboard. It isn't. She made the first move. Pawn to e4. Her grandfather's move, the honest one. The one that said exactly what it intended. Dale looked at it for a long time before he responded. On the morning of the 72nd hour, Dale's phone, a new one Roy had driven to the next county to purchase with cash, rang at 7:14, while Mara was at school and Jillian was at the diner and Roy was in the kitchen making eggs. Dale answered it and listened for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he said confirmed and ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands flat on his knees. Roy appeared in the doorway. He looked at Dale's face and read it the way he seemed to read most things, quickly, accurately, without unnecessary follow-up questions. It moved, Dale said. They executed on the Nashville end at 6 this morning. The names on the hard drive, 4 of them are in custody, 2 more in the next 24 hours. The route documentation gives them enough to freeze the operation for the next 18 months minimum. He stopped. 2 years of work, he said. And his voice was quieter than he meant it to be. I kept thinking it wasn't going to be enough, that I'd built all of it, and it still wasn't going to be enough, was it? Yeah, he cleared his throat. Yeah, it was enough. Roy put a plate of eggs on the table outside the door and walked back to the kitchen without ceremony. The sound of the stove clicking, the coffee maker running, the ordinary sounds of a morning in Roy Casper's house, and Dale sat with them for a moment before standing up. He was ready to stand up without holding on to things. It had taken 3 days, but he was ready. He called Mara's school. He knew he wasn't supposed to. He understood that the protocols around calling a child out of school involved parents and administrators and chains of permission he had no part of. He called anyway because there was one thing he needed to say, and he needed to say it before the momentum of the day carried everyone too far into many directions. The school's secretary was understandably confused by a man asking to leave a message for a 3rd grade student. He kept it simple. He said, "Tell Mara Whitlock that it worked." Just that. It worked. He found out later from Mara herself that she'd gotten the message during reading period, and that she'd read it once and folded the slip of paper very carefully and put it in her jacket pocket and then gone back to her book. Her teacher had watched her do this and had asked quietly if everything was all right, and Mara had looked up with the expression that everyone who knew her recognized, that clear, settled, completely unruffled look that belonged on someone 3 times her age, and said, "Yes, ma'am, everything's fine." Everything was fine. And then it wasn't one more time, because nothing in the story had finished cleanly, and this part wasn't going to either. Dale was packed and ready to leave Roy's house that afternoon when the car came up the driveway. Not a motorcycle, a car. Dark grey rental plates, moving slowly in the way cars move when the driver is reading house numbers. It stopped. A man got out, suited, federal looking in the specific way that federal agents always looked federal, regardless of what they were wearing. A quality of careful composure that came from training and practice. He looked at the house. Then he looked at Dale standing on the porch with a duffel bag, and he stopped. "Dale Mercer," he said. "You're early," Dale said. We moved the timeline up. The man came up the porch steps and stopped 2 feet away. He looked Dale over with the professional assessment of someone cataloging physical damage. "You look like you had a bad week." "I've had worse." Dale set the duffel down. "You got my delivery." "We got your delivery." The agent paused. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." He reached into his jacket and produced a single photograph printed on plain paper. A still from what looked like a security camera. He held it up. "Do you know who this is?" Dale looked at the photograph. It was Bishop, taken from above outside Clement's self-storage, clear enough to be useful, standing outside Unit 44, head slightly tilted in that way he had, his hand resting on the roll door handle. "That's the man who strung me up," Dale said. "We've had a partial ID on him for about 18 months, connected to the Scorpions operation, but never enough to move on directly." The agent lowered the photograph. "The storage facility has cameras. Your delivery triggered our team to pull the footage. This," he tapped the photograph, "plus the documentation in your envelopes is the piece we've been missing." He paused. "His real name is David Caruso, 49 years old. He's been operating under the Bishop name for about 12 years. Former military intelligence, which explains the skill set." Another pause. "He's also, as of this morning, in a federal holding facility in Memphis." Dale stared at him. "We picked him up at a truck stop on I-40 at 4:30 this morning," the agent said. "He apparently spent the night at a motel outside Harlan and then drove north instead of south, which was unexpected. He sat at a crossroads for a while, according to a witness, and then went north." He tilted his head. "You have any idea why he'd go north instead of running?" Dale was quiet for a moment. He thought about what Mara had told him about the conversation through the metal door of Unit 44, about the question she'd asked. "What would Henry say to you right now?" and about the quality of silence that had followed it. "No," he said. "I don't know why, but he thought he did. He thought Bishop had sat at that crossroads and done the thing that hard men sometimes do, when something finds the right crack in the right wall at the right moment. He'd made a different choice than the one he'd been making for 12 years. Not a good choice necessarily, not a redemption, just a different one, north instead of south, toward instead of away. He'd driven into the arms of the people who were going to hold him accountable, and whether that was surrender or something more complicated, Dale couldn't say. He thought about what Mara had said. The difference between you and Bishop is Henry. Maybe the difference was smaller than either of them had understood. Where are you going from here? The agent asked. That's a good question, Dale said. Roy's front door opened and Roy stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and looked at the agent with the unhurried assessment of a man on his own property. You want coffee? He said. The agent blinked. I sure. Come inside, Roy said in the tone that was not quite an invitation and not quite an order. They went inside. Mara arrived 20 minutes later. She came in through the back door the way she always did now, and she stopped when she saw the suited agent at Roy's kitchen table, and she assessed the situation in about 1 second, and then she set her backpack down by the door and sat in her usual chair. The agent looked at her. Then he looked at Dale. This is the child, he said. Her name is Mara, Dale said. The agent looked at Mara again with an expression that was working toward professional neutrality and not completely getting there. "We pulled the storage facility footage," he said to her carefully, as if choosing each word. "We can see you going in. We can see you going out through the back." He paused. "We can see Bishop outside Unit 44 for approximately 22 minutes. Another pause. "He never opened the door." "No," Mara said. "He didn't." "Can you tell me what you talked about?" "Chess," Mara said. The agent sat with that for a moment. "Chess and my grandfather." She held the agent's eyes steadily. "He knew my grandfather. Not personally, he'd learned about him while researching Dale, but he understood what kind of person Henry was. And I think," she paused, choosing her words with the same precision the agent had been using, "I think when I asked him what Henry would say to him, he heard the answer in his own head before I could say anything. And the answer was enough to make him reconsider some things." The agent looked at Dale. Dale looked at his coffee. "She's 8, the agent said, as if confirming a fact he kept having to recheck. "She is," Roy agreed. The agent turned back to Mara. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that surprised everyone at the table, including himself, by the sound of it. "Your grandfather, Henry Whitlock, we have a file on him. He's mentioned in connection with Dale's background, and we pulled everything associated." He stopped. "He was mentioned in 3 other federal cases over about a 30-year period, each time as a peripheral figure, someone who knew someone, or who was connected to a situation tangentially. We never looked at him closely, because he was never a principal." He paused. "I wonder now if we missed something." Mara looked at him. "He helped people," she said simply. "He helped them change direction when they were heading somewhere bad. That's all." She paused. "He didn't do it for cases or files. He did it because he thought people were worth it until they proved otherwise." She picked up her coffee mug. Roy poured for her automatically now without comment, no longer bothering with the formality of objecting. "He thought Bishop was worth it too, I think. He never met him, but he built the person who talked to him through a door in the dark. That counts for something." The kitchen was very quiet. Roy refilled everyone's coffee. Dale looked at the table. He was thinking about a 19-year-old version of himself, at the edge of a bad cliff, and a man who'd walked up to him, without being asked and without any reason except that he'd seen something worth salvaging. He was thinking about 30 years of different choices that had flowed from that one moment. He was thinking about 2 years of work into envelopes in a mailbox on Daring Lane, and everything that had moved because of it. He was thinking about an 8-year-old girl climbing an oak tree in 12 seconds to work and not loose in the dark, and about the same girl talking a dangerous man back from the edge of something worse through a metal door. He was thinking about what it meant to leave things behind that were worth something. "I'm not going back to the club," he said. He didn't announce it. He just said it in the same tone a person uses when they're telling someone a decision they have already fully made. "Whatever happens with the federal cooperation, whatever arrangement they work out, I'm done with the life I have been for a while. I just needed something to push me past the last wall." He looked at Mara when he said it. She looked back. "What will you do?" Roy asked. Dale thought about it. "I don't know exactly." He paused. "Something that makes use of what I know. There are kids out there." He stopped, found his footing again. "Kids in situations I've been in who are standing at the edge of something and have nobody to walk up to them and say, 'I see something worth salvaging.'" He glanced at Roy. "Henry left a gap. Somebody's got to walk into it." Roy looked at him for a long moment. "You'd be reasonably terrible at it starting out," he said. "Probably, and you'd get better. That's generally how it works." Roy nodded. "Henry was terrible at it starting out, too. He told me that. He said the first person he tried to help told him to go to hell and meant it." He sipped his coffee. "The second person was Dale." Dale looked at Roy sharply. "He told me about you," Roy said simply. "He didn't use your name, but the story was yours. He told it as the example of why it was worth trying even when it didn't work the first time." He set his mug down. "He was proud of what you became. Dale, I want you to know that. He followed what you were doing from a distance. He knew about the 2 years of work before you knew he knew. The room held that for a moment. Dale pressed his lips together. He looked at the grain of the table. He never said anything. Henry showed people he believed in them by trusting them to keep going without his supervision, Roy said. That was his way. He started you, and then he stepped back, and let you be what he'd started. He paused. He did the same thing with Mara. He knew he wasn't going to be here to see where it went. But he trusted the start he'd given her to be enough. Mara had been listening to this without speaking. She was holding her coffee mug in both hands, the way she'd seen her grandfather hold his, and her face was doing the complex, quiet thing it did when she was absorbing something that was going to take a long time to fully process. He knew, she said, that he wasn't going to. The last year, Roy said gently. He knew the last year. His heart had been talking to him for a while, and the doctors confirmed what it was saying. He looked at her steadily. He worked harder that last year than any year before it. Every morning in the yard, every lesson, every skill, every piece of himself he could fit into you. Before he had to go, he paused. He wasn't leaving you. He was moving into you. There's a difference. Mara looked down at the table. She didn't cry. She had the particular relationship with grief of a person who'd processed most of it already in private in the time since he had died. The way he taught her to process difficult things fully, honestly, and without performing it for an audience. What she felt instead was a settling, a deep structural settling. The way a house settles when all its beams finally find their truest position. She'd thought for 14 months that Henry had left. Now she understood that he'd arrived. He'd arrived in her hands and her eyes, in the way she thought and the way she moved, in the 14-second oak tree climb, and the knots and the chess, and the question asked through a metal door in the dark. It had changed the direction of a dangerous man's next 12 hours. He hadn't left. He was right here. He was exactly here. Okay, she said quietly to no one in particular. To all of them. Okay. The federal agent left after another hour with Dale's formal statement and an agreement about next steps that involved lawyers and timelines Mara didn't fully follow. He paused at the door on his way out and looked back at the kitchen, one more time at Roy with his coffee, at Dale standing by the window, finally able to stand without holding anything, at Mara sitting in her chair at the table. Off the record, the agent said. He seemed to be choosing this carefully. What happened in this house over the last 3 days, the storage facility, the records, all of it is the kind of thing that doesn't have a good box to put it in. In my job, there are forms for everything, and I'm going to have to find a way to write a report that, he paused, accurately describes events without causing 17 different problems. He looked at Mara specifically. I'm going to say that a confidential source provided critical material assistance. That's accurate. That's accurate, Mara agreed. He nodded once and left. Dale was gone by the following morning. He came to say goodbye at the Whitlock house. He knocked at the front door, which felt right, and Jolene let him in and didn't make it complicated, which was its own form of grace. She shook his hand and said, "You were important to my father," and Dale said, "He was everything to me." And that was the whole of it, clean and sufficient. He crouched down to Mara's level in the front hallway. He was still favoring the left side, still moving carefully, but he was upright without help, and his eyes were clear. "You know what you did," he said. "I don't need to tell you. I know. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to think about this about you, about what happened for the rest of my life." He held her eyes, not because it was dramatic, because it was real. "You were the realest thing I encountered in about 20 years of not very real situations." Mara looked at him steadily. "Are you going to be okay?" He thought about the question the way she always thought about questions. Actually thought about it not as a social formality, but as a real inquiry deserving a real answer. "Yeah," he said. "I think for the first time in a long time, I actually am." He paused. "Your grandfather was right. You know that. Everything he believed you were going to be, he was right." She didn't look away. "So were you," she said. "He was right about you too." Dale stood up. He nodded once to Jolene. He picked up his duffel. He went out the front door and down the porch steps and got on his bike. And the engine turned over with that particular rumble that Mara would always, for the rest of her life, associate with this week with the sound of something approaching that turned out to be something completely unexpected. She watched him go from the front porch, watched until the sound of the engine faded into the distance and was replaced by the ordinary sounds of the Harlan morning. Jolene came and stood beside her. She didn't say anything for a moment. She put her arm around Mara's shoulders and Mara leaned into her slightly, just slightly, and they stood there together in the cold air while the town went about its business around them. "Your grandfather," Jolene said finally. Her voice was careful, feeling its way through something she'd been working toward since Roy's kitchen. "All those mornings, all those years of I thought he was just..." She stopped. "I didn't understand what he was doing." "Neither did I," Mara said. "Not while it was happening. And now," Mara thought about it. About the oak tree and the knots and the hollow in the earth and the metal door and the chessboard and the questions she'd asked a man she'd never met before about a man they'd both loved in different ways. She thought about envelopes in a mailbox and a mail truck on a county road and a motorcycle turning north at a crossroads instead of south. He was building something, she said. He just couldn't stay to see what it became. Jolene tightened her arm around Mara's shoulders. She didn't trust her voice enough to speak, so she didn't try. That afternoon, Mara went out to the yard, the same yard where Henry had stood with her every morning for 3 years, patient and unhurried, teaching her things she didn't yet know she'd need. She stood in the center of it and she breathed. And then she began to move through the sequence of forms he'd given her. The balance work, the stance transitions, the slow economy of motion that looked like nothing from the outside and was everything from the inside. Jolene found her there an hour later. She stood in the doorway and watched without announcing herself. Watched her daughter move through those quiet, deliberate forms with the absolute concentration of someone who was not practicing but living. And she felt something shift in her chest, something large, unstructural, and long overdue. She recognized it. It was understanding, the full and final understanding of what her father had been putting into this child, and why, and what for. She sat down on the porch steps. She watched Mara finish the sequence and stood still for a moment. Then she turned and saw her mother and walked over and sat beside her on the steps without speaking. They sat together in the quiet of the late afternoon, mother and daughter, in the yard where Henry Whitlock had spent the last good years of his life. Putting everything he was into everything, she would become and Mara Whitlock, -1 years old, granddaughter of Henry, daughter of Jolene, student of everything, sat in that yard in Harlan and breathed, and was exactly what her grandfather had always known she would be, not because he had seen the future, but because he had built it one morning at a time, one lesson at a time, one quiet act of belief at a time until the thing he'd built was strong enough to stand on its own and face whatever the world sent toward it. She was exactly that, as strong. She had always been going to be.